Okay, so imagine this, right? It's a snowy night, Boston. You're at a house party. Pretty normal, like a cozy gathering, friends, family.
That's familiar.
Yeah, typical Saturday night, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what if I told you just outside, in the snow, buried, there's a body
Oh, wow.
of a Boston police officer, no less.
That changes things.
Yeah, it's a chilling mystery, and that's what we're going to dive into today.
All right, so who's the victim?
So the victim's name's John O'Keefe,
Mm-hmm.
and the prime suspect, his girlfriend, Karen Reed.
Okay, and what's the girlfriend saying?
Well, she says she doesn't remember what happened.
Convenient.
Right, like,
So we've got a dead cop, a girlfriend with amnesia. What else?
oh, there's a lot more.
Lay it on me.
So this case, it's got everything, right? A tragic death, conflicting accounts,
It's always the conflicting account.
always. And a web of relationships, the deeper you go, the more tangled it gets.
The deeper you go. That's what we do here.
Exactly. And you can't forget the internet, armchair detectives, all of the online sleuths. Everyone's got a theory.
They love a good mystery.
Oh, they do. And this one, it's a doozy. I mean, is Karen Reed a cold-blooded killer? Is she a terrified woman caught in a lie? Or is she an innocent victim framed by, I don't know, some powerful group?
Lots of questions.
We've got a lot to unpack.
All right, let's unpack it. Where do we start?
So we're going to try to untangle this whole web, look at the evidence, the theories, and hopefully by the end, you'll have a better idea of what happened that night back in January 2022.
2022. All right, so not that long ago.
No, it's pretty recent. In this case, it's still unfolding, so, a lot can change.
Case things interesting.
Absolutely. Okay, so for starters, let's go back a bit. Karen Reed and John O'Keefe, they had history. Dated back in their 20s, went their separate ways, life happened.
Happens to the best of us.
Right. And then they reconnect in their 40s.
Second time around.
Yeah. Now, John, by this point, he's raising his niece and nephew.
Oh. Why is that?
Terrible tragedy. His sister and brother-in-law, they both passed away. Left him as guardian.
So, single dad police officer, that's a lot to handle.
Yeah, no doubt.
Okay, so back to that night. What happened?
All right, so it's January 28th, 2022. Karen and John, they go out with friends, bar hopping in Canton, Massachusetts.
Canton, got it.
Their last stop, a house party.
Outhouse.
So the house belongs to another Boston police officer, Brian Albert.
Okay, so cops, families, friends, all together.
Yeah, sounds pretty average, right? Like a Saturday night thing.
Sure, but this Brian Albert guy, was he close with John O'Keefe?
Well, that's an interesting question because these connections, they're going to be important later on. Remember, everyone at those bars, at that house party, they were all part of the same social circle.
Small world.
Very small.
Okay, then what?
All right, so at the early hours of January 29th, John O'Keefe, he's found unresponsive outside that house.
Outside.
Yeah. In the snow.
So 1 minute he's at a party, next minute.
Gone.
That's rough.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Now, 3 women find him. Jennifer McCabe, she's Brian Albert's sister-in-law. Then there's Carrie Roberts, a friend of John's. And, of course, Karen Reed.
The girlfriend.
The girlfriend.
What did he look like when they found him?
So they find him lying face down in the snow. Injuries to his head, a broken cocktail glass nearby.
Cocktail glass, huh? That's interesting.
Yeah, every detail matters in a case like this. And this is where things start to get a little murky. Because initially, Karen, she claims she dropped John off at the party, wasn't feeling well, and went home to bed.
Stomachache, something like that?
That's her story. Pretty simple, right?
Simple, but is it true?
Well, that's the million-dollar question.
Lead the way.
Okay, so investigators, they start digging.
Naturally.
And they find evidence that puts Karen at the scene much later than she initially claimed.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, is right.
So what happens then?
Well, her story starts to change.
Of course it does.
Right.
All right, I'm hooked. What's the new story?
All right, so here's where things get interesting. The prosecution, they're saying that Karen and John had an argument that night. She drove him to the party, dropped him off.
Okay, so far so good.
Yeah, but then, as she's making a 3-point turn to leave, they say she accidentally backed into him with her Lexus SUV.
Backed into him?
Yeah.
With her car?
With her car.
Wow. And what, she didn't notice?
Well, their theory is she panicked. Maybe intoxicated, who knows?
And she just left him there in the snow.
That's what they're saying.
That's cold, literally.
Right. And it gets worse.
Oh, there's more.
They're saying she drove home, only went back later that morning when John wasn't answering his phone. Pretended to be surprised when they found him.
So she staged the whole thing.
That's the prosecution's case.
Bold strategy.
Right. And they've got some evidence to back it up.
Like what?
They found broken taillight fragments at the scene, matched them to her Lexus.
Physical evidence. That's hard to argue with.
They also pointed to her behavior that night, erratic, possibly drunk.
We talked about that.
And then there are these statements she supposedly made to the EMTs when they arrived.
What kind of statements?
Witnesses say she was crying out, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him."
Whoa. If that's true, that's pretty damning.
Sounds like an open and shut case.
Seems like it.
Wrong.
Plot twist.
Big time. Karen's defense team, they've got a whole different story. They say she didn't hit him with her car at all. They're saying she's being framed.
Framed? By who?
Maybe the police themselves.
Hold on, this is going full conspiracy theory now.
Yeah, buckle up. This is where it gets wild.
So they're saying it wasn't an accident, she didn't hit him while driving away.
Exactly. They're claiming this was all planned, maybe to protect someone else.
To protect someone else? Like who?
Well, they're pointing fingers at the people inside the house that night, suggesting something happened during that party, something that led to John's death, and now everyone's covering it up.
Okay, now this is where I need more details. What evidence do they have for this cover-up?
Well, one of their biggest claims revolves around a Google search done on a device inside Brian Albert's house.
A Google search? For what?
Get this, how long to die in cold.
How long to die in cold? Wow.
And the timing is crucial here. The defense is adamant this search happened hours before John was found, like 2:27 a.m.
So they're saying someone in that house knew John was hurt outside in the freezing cold and they didn't help him.
That's their argument.
That's pretty disturbing.
Right. And the defense is saying this search, along with other suspicious details, point to a possible conspiracy.
Okay, I'm listening. What other details?
Well, for starters, there are inconsistencies in the witness statements.
Inconsistencies? How so?
Well, people's memories of that night, they're a little fuzzy. Who was where, when, it doesn't all line up.
Okay, that's not uncommon after a night of drinking.
True, but the defense is suggesting it's more than just hazy memories. They're saying some people are deliberately changing their stories.
To protect themselves. Or someone else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then there's the whole issue with Brian Albert's basement.
His basement? What about it?
So shortly after John's death, Brian Albert removes the flooring in his basement. And then, not long after that, he sells the house.
Okay, that is suspicious.
The defense is saying it's all connected. They think he was trying to hide something.
They hide evidence.
Maybe. And then there's the dog.
The dog. What dog?
Brian Albert had a German Shepherd, a big one. The defense is arguing that the dog could have been involved somehow, maybe attacked John outside.
Are they saying the dog killed him?
They're not ruling it out. And here's the thing. The dog disappeared shortly after the incident. Rehomed, they say.
Conveniently rehomed.
Right. It's all very circumstantial. But the defense is using it to create doubt, to suggest there are other possibilities that haven't been explored.
So they're throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Pretty much. And they're naming names, too. They've specifically pointed fingers at Brian Albert and his nephew, Colin. They both drive Ford Edges.
Ford Edges. Okay, why is that important?
Well, it's similar to Karen's Lexus.
Ah, I see where you're going with this. They're saying maybe a witness saw a Ford Edge that night and got it confused with Karen's car.
Bingo.
Clever.
Right. And the defense is saying that Brian and Colin, their alibis are shaky.
So they're saying maybe Brian or Colin hit John, not Karen.
That's their theory.
And what about the prosecution? What's their response to all of this?
Oh, they're not buying it. They're saying Brian and Colin have cooperated fully. Their alibis check out.
And the dog.
Just a coincidence, they say.
And the basement flooring.
Unrelated to the case. The prosecution is calling this a desperate attempt by the defense to shift the blame away from Karen.
So two completely different versions of events.
It's like we're watching two different movies. In one, Karen's the villain. In the other, she's the victim.
And the truth is somewhere in between.
Maybe. But with all this information flying around, it's easy to get caught up in the speculation, the accusations. The internet is a wild place. Everyone's an expert. Everyone's got an opinion. It's hard to know what to believe.
And it can get dangerous.
Absolutely.
People can get hurt, reputations ruined.
The district attorney, he actually spoke out about it, condemning all the online harassment. He's like, hey, this case should be decided in the courtroom, not on social media.
Makes sense.
Right. He's reminding everyone the jurors need to be impartial. They need to make their decision based on the facts, not on what they're reading online.
That's a good point. But it's hard, isn't it, to ignore all the noise, all the opinions, especially in a case like this that's gotten so much attention.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Because this case, it's become a real lightning rod, you know?
How so?
Well, you got people who are absolutely convinced that Karen is guilty. They're painting her as a liar, a manipulator, someone who deserves to be punished.
And on the other side,
You've got people who are just as convinced that she's innocent. They see her as a victim of a corrupt system or even a malicious frame-up.
so it's more than just a legal case, it's become a symbol.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the problem is, both sides, they're looking at the same evidence, but they're seeing completely different things. The prosecution, they're focused on Karen's drinking that night, her changing story, the fact that she was the last one with John.
They're building a narrative of guilt.
Right.
And the defense, what's their narrative?
They're saying, look, Karen might have been drinking, but that doesn't make her a murderer. They're trying to humanize her, paint her as a woman who was scared, confused, maybe even in shock.
So they're appealing to emotion.
And they're also highlighting those text messages, those voicemails that suggest John might have been the one who was unhappy in the relationship.
They're trying to flip the script, make John the bad guy.
Exactly.
Interesting strategy. But does it work?
Well, that's what the jury has to decide.
Right? The jury.
It's a lot of pressure to be in their shoes.
For sure. So for those of us watching from the outside, trying to make sense of it all, what should we be focusing on? What are the key things to pay attention to?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to be aware of our own biases. We all come to this case with our own preconceived notions about guilt and innocence, about police conduct, about relationships.
Right. We all have our own baggage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we need to be willing to question our assumptions, consider other explanations, and avoid jumping to conclusions.
Good advice.
And we can't forget the human cost of all of this. This isn't just a story. It's real life.
Someone died. Families are hurting.
Exactly. So as we follow this case, let's try to remember that.
Sounds like a plan. It really makes you think, doesn't it, about how one night can change everything.
It does.
And for everyone involved, not just Karen and John.
Yeah, their families, their friends, they're all going through this too.
A ripple effect, you know?
Absolutely.
So let's try to piece together what we know about that night inside that house before John ended up outside.
Right, because the defense is saying that whatever happened to John, it started inside the house.
They're painting this picture of a chaotic scene, lots of alcohol, emotions running high. They're even suggesting that John might have been assaulted in there.
Assaulted?
By who?
They haven't named a specific person, but they're hinting that maybe there was a fight, a physical altercation. Remember Brian Albert, the homeowner?
Yeah, the cop who had the party.
Him. They're saying his actions after John's death, like removing the flooring in his basement and then selling the house, it's all suspicious.
They think he was trying to hide something.
Exactly.
But are they saying that Brian Albert killed John?
They haven't gone that far, but they're definitely implying that he knows more than he's letting on.
And the police are covering it up.
That's the defense's theory.
Wow.
They're saying that the investigation was biased from the start, influenced by those personal connections to the Alberts.
Right, that whole blue wall of silence idea.
Exactly. They're claiming the police focused on pinning the blame on Karen instead of looking at other possibilities. So it's like the prosecution is saying one thing,
And the defense is saying the complete opposite.
and both sides think they're right.
That's how it works in court, right?
It's like a puzzle, but the pieces don't fit.
And the jury has to figure out what the picture really looks like.
That's a lot of pressure.
For sure.
Okay, but even if we entertain the defense's theory for a second, why would so many people cover this up? What's the motive?
That's the big question, isn't it?
The defense hasn't really given a clear answer.
They've hinted at some possibilities, like maybe protecting the reputation of the police department, or maybe some personal loyalty to the Alberts.
Or maybe they're just trying to create doubt, even if they don't have a specific motive.
Yeah, that's always possible.
All right, let's talk about Karen's behavior that night.
Okay, so witnesses have said she was drunk, acting weird.
The prosecution is using that to say she was reckless, maybe even intentionally hit John.
But the defense is saying, hold on, maybe there's another explanation.
Right, they brought up her medical conditions, right?
Yeah, they said those could have affected her behavior.
And they've also emphasized that Karen cooperated with the police. She took a blood alcohol test. And later that morning, when they questioned her, she wasn't drunk anymore.
So they're trying to say, look, she might have been drinking, but that doesn't mean she's a killer.
Right, they're trying to make her seem more sympathetic.
And they've also brought up those text messages, those voicemails, that suggested maybe the relationship wasn't so great.
Yeah, but the defense said those were taken out of context, right? Like, couples fight, it doesn't mean they want to kill each other.
Exactly. And they've even suggested that maybe John was the one who was unhappy in the relationship.
So they're trying to flip the script, make John the bad guy.
In a way, yeah.
It's a lot to wrap your head around. Conflicting witness testimonies, forensic evidence that's being disputed, two completely different stories about what happened.
It's a real legal maze.
Okay, but if you had to pick one thing, what's the most important piece of evidence in this case?
I think it's the timeline.
The timeline of what happened that night.
Yes. And specifically, whether John was ever inside the Albert house.
Because if he was, that supports the defense's theory, right?
Mm.
That something happened in there.
Exactly. In that Google search, how long to die in cold, it becomes a lot more significant if it can be connected to John being inside the house.
Right, because it suggests someone knew he was hurt and didn't help him.
But the prosecution is saying John never went inside the house. They've got witnesses, they've got phone records.
So it comes down to who you believe.
Whose story is more convincing?
And that's up to the jury.
Yep.
This case, it's like a roller coaster. There are so many twists and turns.
And it's not over yet.
No, we're still waiting for the verdict.
It'll be interesting to see what the jury decides.
Yeah, it will.
But regardless of the outcome, this case, it's a reminder that things aren't always black and white.
Truth can be complicated.
And sometimes, even with all the evidence in the world, we might never know exactly what happened.
That's true.
But it's important to keep asking questions, to keep searching for answers.
Exactly.
All right, that's about all the time we have for today.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
As always, it's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us.
Keep those minds curious.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.